Malum total mera gidrogui ko mal masal mo sibil guk me guk mo sedel met magrel al total guk momsada bebira toil gire legal urol gora rus entera mot bokle ma awera dolmol me mal di shakal mutalti al mera silela tial blay el gire la tial el mosedel me guk usper tial radio gora asira bebira information e direi che il suo di mo ai sattablora ora wal announcement maluben sud ngase sel goto se sel talngi maluben one drop film festival amornya ora wal los angeles mornya wal los angeles sel october 25 ma sel october 25 هذا البيرا بكريك يتمو orala اجل ora مغدب الفيلم الترغال ngal skula mi rule ongerul sub malubang announcement ta se el altama gora rus center o sigra tal adal mo urol security etial el tora urel la security gora rus center am simra lum ewidel gobsin el albil october 27 nga close sel announcement maluben sel open sel announcement e dire che tutto mal soal mutalti al malungila rungul mo o sioga ngal guest leader tutto nga Dr. Richard McKenzie nga matatal mangrove ecosystem sebedo laseng mal semor al sela kabur semetial agar klangal ngar al sela kabur mo bangeder al tutto makadasad mo o mongo ay seguida tetele la urera kabur se gra ul mon club to trail especially in southern wala motat se la sing blue carbon tial kiteliol tel blue lado tbdil ma ya badra ayang tial melidiul ngara urere la ngara akang gester malubeng ora involvement tra mangrove sebel el gigiringi se gidel el makiteliol tel blue lado tbdil mortel melidiul Malwai say, Richard, I don't need to translate what I was telling. It's all about introduction. So at this time, I wanted to bring us right into the discussion. So maybe we'll talk about, discuss why mangroves and mangrove ecosystem are important and what is threatening them. And then maybe tell us a little bit about your background about working in the mangrove areas.
Okay. Unyotu Tao, thank you for having me. Swakoko Boris. It's great to be here to talk about mangroves and blue carbon. So I guess to answer the first question, why are mangroves important for Palau? There are several reasons why. There was a conference a few weeks ago, and Dr. Yim Golbu started the conference out with talking about the power of three, and the three being mangrove, seagrass, and reef. And while the three can exist on their own, when they exist together, they are the strongest, they are the healthiest. And when we have healthy mangroves, seagrasses, and reef, we have healthy people for several reasons. The first is mangroves are important for habitat for fish and shrimp and crabs and clams, which are an important food source for Palauans and many Pacific Islanders. The mangroves provide a habitat that allows young fish to grow and develop, so they have this nursery value. But there's also a lot of food in mangrove forests that allow among and dul, other animals, clams and crabs to feed and to grow. So they are from an aspect of food security, they're vitally important for human survival, and they also provide a lot of delicious food. So that's one reason. The second reason is that have you ever walked through the mangroves? Can you run through the mangroves?
Not really.
No, how come?
It's too dense.
Right. Right. So there's you're constantly tripping over roots or hitting trunks. So you couldn't play a game of football, or rugby in the mangroves because it's impossible to run. And it's because of those structures that when the ocean flows through the mangrove, that those structures sort of, they cause the water to slow down. And that gives us two other benefits. So one, if there's a storm, so like a tsunami or a typhoon, if there's waves, when those waves, which are very powerful, when they hit that coastline and they hit those roots and those trunks, they have that same resistance that we do, and it slows the wave energy down. There's a statistic that says for every 100 meters of mangrove, so every 300 feet of mangrove, you can reduce wave height by 10%.
Oh, wow.
For every 1,000 meters, which would be 3,000 feet, you can reduce inland flooding. And I think there are examples of that here in Palau. So I think it was Typhoon Bofa, when it hit the northern part of Babeldaw. It was either Bofa or Haiyan. I always mix the two up. But areas that were behind mangroves in northern Babeldaw appeared to be more protected. So mangroves are like a coastal defense.
Right.
So like a fortress. They protect the island from those.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay.
I forgot to mention this in the beginning. We have to kind of go through some, and then I have to translate for the sake of the older listeners.
Sorry.
So let's stop at the moment for now, and then I will try to summarize what you just said.
Okay.
Richard, o ay sa segal, Dr. Mackenzie, o ay sa seng Mark Klug tutrel akaburs, yung area erul lug tutrel. Ako, kadrogul mo din kasi mbli la kita adar bela mo kadam din mbli la apatol gal sa edel mo tringi arwandul amang marwa pek pating la ora odoy mas edel tira mangrove ya edire ko si silta meng ya selong erul luuleng klok tutre la kaburs seguido lo hacen wal algora am sabakl malum protectra aigal gabo aigal kula bulu ngagi dem nom sadra sesel sugu mangari agora tsunami mei etial gabur sa tial tetele la gabur sel mali misil bitoga dur mara mangora mal lim kamkal seya sel sugu maklol ada sa amel me subila gabur se seya angosuir el gora aslor tial gabur se tial el ada sa Mandiaka dil masisi ilme subila akaboko mabol sibel gora walo almongui sa akaboko siya lol goring elang kagi dem nomol gol asay toram la daital geisang ito asay al sugu meng ngedel dartel fit aklung la akaburs en sibel walo godir tial adasa malubeng wave tsunami gora klol adasa ngara ikela akaburs mei sel gelegra al sela did you say 100 meter?
Yeah.
Okay. Sel gelegra tayo klol ada saol subi sel ikla kaburse el gelegra 100 meter maluben 300 feet el mor al sel moral budula kaboko et tayo del kabursa se el walo godira tru il basenter sel klisi el tial ada saol masubira elang kagi del regal milmon mo lo asay al sugum tal tela el meter maluben ngedel tela el fit esegid el sa al suma da sa amel subira kila kaburs e goleg el tal tela el sac el budula bulu esel lo como dice el tal tela el sac etial klol da sa amlamo level amlamo flat amlamo sel da sa digyak krisil digyak powering el tomelia digyak krisil tomelia kaboko meng ayga gora daital uldo mes asing membulgulak mal sugum tial gabursa mal bral gora wal oral mokrok bebdula outside en wal oral mokloa al sebel el sobakli. I just briefly explain okay. And so Richard Dr. Mackenzie, sorry, I know you have done extensive work around the world and stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work you've been doing and how was how the places you've been kind of looks like in terms of like or looks like comparing to Palau?
Yeah. But let me lead up to that. So, and related to your first question, there's one other benefit of mangroves, and that's that they can remove and store more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than any forested ecosystem.
Wow. Lagi kita ada bela belum ngejel kora maklulu tutile la mangrove luaseng kada malungot o di medringi o sisilta men gora awalo sub akra kula bulu akabo bo elang kagi del ay sergi lasay ngarial mu tara awal dire el cloud to tlel el klungele la tial el mangrove ecosistema liben tial kabursa ngolong seu wal absorb liben ngolong seu lo mi el sel makngit el yolt tial bulurado tob dinil atmosphere do sen carbon dioxide Saya mangrove ilang kagi da Dr. McKenzie lo asing a mangrove atara ko to clow al orgdi muto kakaros el badangel ecosystem el tral lo rega tial carbon dioxide indi ela mangrove atara mal clow al ngabti malubeng orgdi tial carbon dioxide to do mamlidil.
And that's important for to fight climate change because we're trying to reduce the greenhouse gases, the CO2 in the atmosphere. But it's also important because we can use that carbon storage to potentially get money for conservation. So if we conserve mangroves or restore them, we could potentially generate money that could benefit the communities.
Okay, what's it tagi dile ospera mangrove mulubtra tagi del carbon na sebe del dire lo spering gora mo ula karger el mo no segal community and how we do that.
Well, we can talk about that again here and when I come back to that topic.
Okay.
But that's just another benefit of mangroves, and that carbon is called blue carbon. So I don't know if the listeners have heard of this term, but blue carbon is the buzz. It's a buzzword everywhere. They're talking about it at the United Nations. They're talking about it at climate change forums. And do you know where blue carbon really started?
No.
Palau.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
I like to sort of brag that Palau is essentially the birthplace of blue carbon, because we did a study here in the early 2000s in Irai. We sampled mangroves off of the Papago Boardwalk. And we discovered that that's where we learned that mangroves store 5 times more carbon than other forested ecosystems, and it resulted in this much larger Indo-Pacific study that really emphasized the importance of mangroves at fighting climate change. And it all started here in Palau.
Oh. How many years did you start that project in Papago?
That was back in 2007.
Oh. Ela será 2007. Dr. McKenzie, that time you were working with the Bureau of Agriculture, right?
It was BOA, it was EQPB, and Pickrick was involved in that as well.
Oh, well, ang Dr. McKenzie OI sa sesera 2007, ang mle oro tial belaw, lelul bengela tial Guararus Center, ma EQPB, ma BOA tial Bureau of Agriculture. Ito bilang mokra ko ra auror tial Papago. Tial Papago hotel ngairai temlor sel gabu sa Papago ay minit mokra auror ogi sa idulurir temlo gora wal sel lom subir sa research en wablo betig lo asay tial mangrove ang wal leim el basenta ndiak leim el basenta wal leim el time el isoisa aklung el carbon sel orgdi rabebir areas el nia direk gora wal oreg de tial carbon wal 5 times created carbon mangmal ko lo se ko gi lurerir to sem na lura Papagol murura super sel gabur sa Papago enya dilu stagi del to el al time ta waldil murgol to el selbo dosado tial el tora makit el atrabilu to sperin to la se blue carbon será logro seguidli Papago enya dilu stagi del turno se blue carbon el time es el ruamiting ra UN Miguel Macrol el gora al adrab lulad el malgol gira environment او hablar de li tayid el togol blue carbon el tiam amde el togol sel dosada gayid el kit el atram lidul egdo spet tayid el togol como blue carbon belat temnar seguid de direk lorol ma Fiji. So you did the work in Irai, and then you also move on to Fiji and do the same work.
So we sampled mangroves in Indonesia. We sampled mangroves in the Federated States of Micronesia, so Koshrai and Pohnpei, and came up with this really important finding that mangroves can store and remove massive amounts of carbon. And because of that, we got funding to launch a global project called SWAMP, the Sustainable Wetland Adaptation Mitigation Program. This was funded by USAID, and they asked me to go and sample mangroves throughout Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific. And I was so excited because I had read about these mangroves and all these papers and books. I was going to the epicenter of like where mangroves came from. And I got there and I was really disappointed. The mangroves in many of the countries that I worked in, they pale in comparison to the mangroves here in Palau. And the trees here are so much bigger. The forests are so much more beautiful in Palau than almost anywhere I've been in the world. And I have done work in Southeast Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, in Africa, in South America. And I always come back to Palau and I'm just amazed at how beautiful the forests are here. The mangroves.
Okay, baka kita Dr. Mackenzie lo ay sasi misra lo bela lo rafiji el malmal murtay drum suben qora walu suba gal mer kubur sablo la de qor o mesa sen wala tetelel un wablo kan form malu betemlo o si isel togol mo oy tial gal kuburs aklor tiagid mkitel مكيت اللي تلقى مليدو تايد الكربون الور غدي مسيجي دنغانيا امريكا لا املو تور جاجي الريسالت روم سوبيرا روا دكتور ماكنزي قلت مكليا ملغون الفاندرا كلورول جيرلا what's the name of the organization? I mean the grant that you got through SWAP.
It was called SWAMP, and it was from USAID.
Oh, sell USA ID, tell United States aid.
Yep, Agency for International Development.
Right, Agency for International Development. Ulame saigal الجكرة already wa AQPB BOA ma Coral Center. Ewa sa indiak tia mal important lo malulang ga tutel lo sublagat makli. Kame do so doctor da sesera udo del الموسيقى تيجي لهم سوب ملوت الموت مولا أم سوبي لسه مال موعرا بس يجي اليو اس اي دا وتبدا ضد المدرورة البرنامج ده سي سوامب يسيجي دروار يتشار دام لوس إلمو دكتور ماكنزي لوس إلمو رورا تيال ساوث إيست آسيا لو مساجل مانغروب بيبيرا أبلور تيال ساوث إيست آسيا دكتور ماكنزي ديريغلو ملمو ايش لسين مسيرا لوجيب تيجي لورا البايجل بيبيرا بلو إنغورا أبلور بلغتاق لسين Aradra gel bulu akora dia kalsal lo akora dia kalsal masabak ketial kebursa. Emang gora omesa gigit kebursa lagi omesa bela sa bela mal di sedem tiga maklol kebursa ma maklol gergar mburu seng gora wadir gelungi la akan dison tial kebursa bela kampet tiga idra Southeast Asia.
Yeah. And then the other thing that I noticed, so we would go to these mangroves that had been severely degraded and deforested. So either they had been converted to other land uses, or some of the areas have been hit by cyclones. So there's storms that had damaged the systems, and just the impacts from the humans. The mangroves were degraded, and they were having a hard time collecting fish, because when the mangroves got degraded, then the seagrasses got degraded and the coral reef got degraded. So now again, it's the power of three. You've lost that link when the mangroves have been destroyed or degraded, and now again, food security, that was a huge issue in some of the countries that I worked in.
Oh, en kaya mo lo sa same ena sera bolorol may gele e blura Southeast Asia. Ito ngwal ko ramlon mo mtigla say okay. Abe bila gel bulu maklol ta silis amlori mong miltamal la kaburs. Masaral matamal la kaburs. En gora wablo la kamal ngigling atal mel la kaburs dire gel wablo meteng mel adulu la ar mel mel kargel. Mong melgoy lo say kaburs ma adulu la ar matial gargel tial guamranda agar rogul agal kalde agil el wal da kaloror engasib el wal el sab aklisel toera toera ora omengit al suma kabur satalmal ensib el tomelia adululaar el matmal adululaar ensib el matmal tial ngaral mabdul almul el suma agal kalde arungulungil lowror en wadu da sen sob klitial togora ram galgelangi gel marole la oranga omngedra gidra adar bela tial tiaremel omngedra emel.
So then coming back to Palau, we had established permanent plots in the mangroves around Babeldaab. So we worked closely with PICRIC and BOA, and about, I think it was 13 years ago, 10 years ago, we set up more than 100 plots in the mangroves around Babeldaab. And what we would do is, it's kind of hard to see this on the radio, but we would pull up to the mangrove by a boat, and then we would walk transect from the ocean edge of the mangrove to the interior. And then we would set up plots every 75 meters or every 150 feet.
And when you say plots, how big is this plots?
Each plot was about 10 meter, they're circular plots and had a radius of 10 meters or 30 feet.
Okay. And what do you do in those plots?
So in those plots then, we measured, we were curious about the forest structure, the species, and more importantly, the carbon. And so we basically measured every tree that was a certain size. So we measured trees that are bigger than 5 centimeters diameter.
Okay.
So we measured all those trees in those circular plots, and we did that in like 120 permanent plots all around Palau.
Oh wow, that's a lot of work, Dr. McKenzie.
It was awesome.
I know you love background, so you look at it. Anyway, ang kagidin mo lang ko na say, tial bubble rogir, plan established 120 plots, right? Yeah. Permanent plots. Tibla mo tial gubur sa bubble rogir, ogore dual ma dart malu le dula sem plots. Tial plata wa dula sem tial plata bogor del logo del fit atengel nding IBBO mong waset mo tial gubur sa babel daw e mo sel kula gubur sel mebdula garger e gore mra lo sigra akabogo 75 meter, about 75 meter into the coastal area.
Yep.
A 75 meter times 3 say ngarak me del telang 350 feet. 75 meter would be about 350 feet. Yeah. Roughly. Anyway, masaygi the lora sali krala kabur sel mol kabok. Etira establish every 75 meter you establish a plot.
Yep.
Bogsubes. Tangal sagi kula kabok kabur ra ikrel emerald mabdul kabok. Mbek lorael 75 meter malubang medel bogorda edel dat ogim el sak. Etira guk dolumia imora gege del dasem plat el logo del saga klugel IBBO. Ya gege da blal gatbok la dart malu urtial gabur sa bubble dab rogi. That's including east and west. All mangrove in bubble dab.
All bubble dab.
All bubble dab. تملا قطبق لا جيد ال100 دارت مالو IBBO بالرال شلا قبورس يا جيد الله رول مرال مول مسوب ولا شيء وانا اقاقروس بدن قبورس ما مقلونل ان جيد لو ايش راسي سلو مشير قبورس عند المشير جل مجري دينجل تدي شيء 5 centimeter نجل 5 centimeter would be about 2.5 inch.
Yep.
Yeah. Ngel karragar el med lerul suma luben 2 inch aklungel ngey al measuring. So you're doing the measurement in these plots, of course different species,
different
sizes.
Species, yep. And we also sampled the soil. Because what I forgot to mention earlier is that most of the carbon is in the mud. So up to 90% of the carbon is stored in the sediments, and so we wanted to capture that as well. So we measured the trees and we measured the soil, the sediment
In that plot.
in the plot.
In the plot. Okay. Waseng sel tara maklo lorgodi tial carbon tial ila atom no وقتل بس انت carbon غير tial ila atom متمشي غير على sel سيجيد اللغة الساق الاي بي بيوب اي بي بيوب لغة الساق التنجل ملا مكلون لا غير دي الوالو لا غرا سامبل را tial ila atom Okay.
Yeah, and one of what we found, which I think is really amazing, is that there's this band or belt of dwarf mangroves growing around all of Babeldaub. And so dwarf mangroves are they're short-statured mangroves. They look like kind of shrubby mangroves. A great place to see them is if you drive behind the Serongo Supercenter. There's a huge area of dwarf mangrove.
Oh, so that's the dwarf mangrove.
Yeah, they're not baby mangroves. They're adults. They're just stunted.
But they're just a dwarf.
Yeah, and what most of the dwarf mangroves were BNGAOL, Rhizophora piculata. And so the really cool thing is that you can have a species of mangrove, a BNGAOL, that's either tall or it's dwarf for some reason. We don't know why, but we do know that they're very extensive. And when we were analyzing the data, I remembered like setting the transects up with Berius from Pickrick and having to belly crawl like through these tunnels we would create through the dwarf mangroves because you cannot walk through them. And so it made sense to me that they're so extensive. And I have never, again, sampling in mangroves around the world, I have never seen that. They do exist. There are dwarf mangroves elsewhere, but I just have not seen it to the extent we've seen them here in Palau.
Wadi balko ya Dr. McKenzie lasi. Sayidra lulu legal plat. Timlol momti la sengaria tara badeng la kabur sengar belau. El sayid lo la sengobi tol goburus. Dime que gedep. Etia maklo servara tele super center. En wasen Chloe mal gora misel lim gumugul. Masera bolongot mok legal plat en dia sibil gora wal oral mil sebekleng mali misel lim gumugul mata mom iwai we watia luluri o tomorra uluri re em tutura gel dulu la igal guk para tara aerial waseng mal masarngul leng madengek mongane gagi del gobitol goburso din dira salme sablul ade maklur belau malungil arngud ngani segidil.
Yeah, so that was one of our findings, and then we came back about 5 years ago and we remeasured several of the plots, and then we calculated a growth rate. So how fast the mangroves are removing carbon from the atmosphere, and that's the number that you need if you wanted to pursue like a carbon credit to get money for conservation. And what we found is that so first of all, the dwarf mangroves, they're short, but when you compare the total carbon stored in the above ground structure and in the soil, they had the same carbon storage as the tall trees.
Oh wow!
So they're stressed out for some reason, but they're pumping carbon dioxide. They're pumping carbon down to their roots. So their soil is really carbon rich and carbon dense. And River Thomas is working on her master's trying to figure out why. But they're very important for carbon storage. And then when we looked at the productivity, they store carbon at a rate 5 times higher than the tall trees. So they store carbon, they remove carbon. They're very important for climate change, for fighting climate change.
The
dwarf mangroves, yeah.
Wow, malo kasi din. Ngumul ko ya Dr. McKenzie sa igagi del dwarf carbon awal ko raklo wal ko raklo klisil malubeng klo alorgudil carbon raigal bay maklo betongakl ngwaseng aring kelta ngalgedrela le River Thomas ngegi drela nga amalas mulgora ma motmok subel ma skulel wasi gora mo osig wasi ngara ulum klo carbon alorgudil raigal bebirra akaburs gagi del dwarf mangrove klol carbon alorgudil raigal bebirra akaburs en mulgo ngaru baklo sia serabolo lagel sampol tial You said when you compare the amount of carbon collected by dwarf mangrove to a tall mangrove. Dwarf mangrove is 5 times.
It removes carbon at a rate that's about 5 times greater than the tall mangroves.
Oh, ngay gidel dwarf to bitol guburs. Awal remove tial carbon leim time al ngabuti regal gu pebira mangrove.
And so it kind of makes sense because like you see this like little tree and it's stressed out for some reason. And so it's trying to hang on. So it's like how it survives is it pumps all of its energy, all of its carbon into its roots. And that's why, you know, again, when you compare the total carbon in the soil and the trees between a dwarf mangrove and a tall mangrove, they're the same. So again, we don't know what the cause of that stress is, and hopefully River will get to the root of that.
Right. And so basically what we're saying is the mangrove will pump oxygen from that,
Carbon dioxide.
Carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, but then they store it in the roots.
Yep.
Oh, okay. O mailangan kayo dir gabur sangka ngutial ngwalti bitmila kadrogul madinak maigal karakara utelir sel yol ada olto bdringin la usperi otobdir atelir. To sa carbon dioxide. Egal karakara usper segid mailang segid adallo malang segid el carbon dioxide ng artial melitiul. Egor engul lorgodira mambilo tuira badengele otobdil lorgodira ila atom. Sea agora wal tetelela tiagid lo sea agabursa reduce malubeng mga sadal manggagere tiar klungela carbon dioxide ng atmosphere. And so a mangrove compared to like forest. Have you found out like sort of like the difference of forest compared to the mangrove forest? When I say forest, I mean terrestrial forest.
Right. Like in terms of the amount of carbon?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the number we came up with is like 3 to 5 times.
Mangrove and the forest.
3 to 5 times more carbon than the terrestrial forest. And again, it's because of the roots.
Okay. Tamasubot tayo del gora tetelela adallo malalo o la tial kitel atal ngara malidiul e mom tigla sei tial ariom ra klutum asello mo kusirgil mora tial guk ariom ra kaburs eto asa kaburs ngara wal gorangar edel mobdul eimel time aklisiel ngubti tial yoltra tial ariom ngara klutum. Oh, wow. Interesting.
So for example, Palau, the total area of mangroves, like the land area, if you looked at compared mangroves to all our land area, 10% of Palau is mangrove, roughly. But it stores the mangroves, the kabors store 25% of the carbon. So they represent a small area of land, but they store like a quarter of the carbon that's stored in the forest of Palau. I think that's a pretty high. That's amazing.
Right. Mulgolo se seldo mesetial gora RML belaw. Akabur seldo mesetial RML belaw rogir, kabur selmel mera bebula arwaged mara. En wabo de tigula sei, tril basentra tegid el riomla akabursu. Ese loktil basen tawal tel ariom raklut. Indi seguir el geburs el mal di tril basen taklungel a orgdia luim eim el basenta. Raklungel tel carbon ngara amalidir rablur belau. You said what about the terrestrial forest? Have you tried to figure out how much they can sequester or
so we've been focusing mostly on mangroves, but we could easily measure that because so I'm at the Division of Forestry, Land and Water, and we have permanent plots in the terrestrial forest that we can remeasure and calculate a sequestration rate. In general, the literature is saying that the mangroves actually have a higher productivity than upland forest, but I don't know the numbers for Palau.
Ako na dulgan nila say may la say gil gabur sa orgadia ibel basente ewa ngarak rom lo say ndira ka la gaysang ngi ndingar niya agriculture dira ka gigil platel the plots for Bureau of Agriculture Yeah, Bureau of Agriculture. Are they about the same plots used in the mangrove or different?
Yeah, so it's Bureau of Environment now.
Yeah, Bureau of Environment.
But yes, they're about the same size.
Oh, makora gukti mle marugo gering ilo asi. Malo si tial gabur sil 3% taklungera sil dungun mera ermel belau e orgo dia lu ma 1%. Ngara klungel tial koriom e ngasendirga kal gora gutmok lagi. Ndingaria o sil plat sil tial Bureau of Agriculture o elam Bureau of Environment. Adira liru lak medro sil plat men sebadel bulgula sei. Men sebadel anytime gadi mo sois for magel plat seguk collect gel gire collect gora o gu kutub di selo sem malwaisha era mel bela ngara klungela sem elor gadi tel kit lor trangamli di. Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
So that means anytime we can just go in, measure the terrestrial forest plots and can come up with a rough idea of how much the terrestrial forest can remove.
Yeah. And that's through remeasurement. So you can look at the standing amount through a first measurement, and then we tag the trees and we go back, and then you can measure the tree because it grows, right? And then based upon that, you can calculate what the carbon gain or the loss is from the forest.
Oh, okay. Oh, مسيدا تتلت الورورة. تا أجي البلات تمام تمشي على how often do you like go back and remeasure maybe 5 years?
Every 5 years is recommended, yeah.
Mela tuut makrisi the plat same with the mangrove.
Yep.
Mela jagi the plat sebal kat mokra mangrove ma oreo mel. Sebel wal backclaim rak egduk mga measure legal gargara mo moklo. Masal the measure egi da ko space egi del gora atele la ke isa gang eguk biskida beso la sei mela guk plabora se mokla gal tim la moklo entela klungela blalor gdima mendia se la sei ta to dia se la sei kada di mot tiagi de one time the measure tiang emo mendia sei tiagi da klungela am kitilol tial goburs mali bengoriom la orgdi imragru le tial goburs ma ariom lam lama agam lam moklo mung sel guk tribul waba al mongod al orgdi mung gagi de mongod sei ngila back claim rag uk pod measure agi the plots eguk come up with a new calculation. Oh wow, very interesting.
Yeah. It's math is fun. So and then you can use especially with blue carbon and mangroves, we're talking about how to participate in carbon markets, which this is a global discussion. Like how can, if you conserve mangroves or you restore them, how could you generate money to benefit the communities? And so I did some back of the envelope calculations with the numbers we had for Palau, and so I like to put it in terms of baseball. Do you like baseball?
Right.
Who's your team?
Usually. Oh no, sorry. I don't really watch baseball.
Baseball. Okay. Well, I was a huge Orioles fan until the playoffs, but so Palau has about when you look at the area of mangroves, it's the equivalent to about 3,000 baseball fields.
Oh, okay.
And so if you took one baseball field worth of mangroves and you set it aside for conservation, you could generate potentially anywhere from $100 to $200 per baseball field. So the more baseball fields, the more money you can generate on an annual basis. And so, and of course, that those are. I'm thinking that's a low estimate because Taiwan came out here a couple of months ago. There was a Blue Ocean Summit that we hosted with them, that MAFE hosted with them, and the numbers they were using were much higher than the numbers I have been using. But basically, it looks like there's a potential that to generate funds if mangroves were conserved, and on an annual basis, and then that money, ideally could go back to the community and yeah.
I have a question, but let's explain that to the our listeners. Ngwase ngmelgo ya ngaruba kala si tial blue carbon adire se del gora ospering il gora sisbele laudo ma ngwase el time ablu lath especially in am southern la si ngumakaranga al suguma ablu olong sel gigiringi tial klungela kabur sang magarada gora wadril mosbel bayol sis baudo de I mean gigiringi tial klungela carbon dioxide. You said the UN are now in a discussion on how to reduce the carbon and then generate
There are discussions on how we go about that. I know there was an Article 6 that came out that talks about carbon and voluntary markets, and I know Palau has been active in that with our the Ambassador Seed and Xavier Matsumoro. But it's a global discussion, and we're still trying to figure out the mechanisms to make it happen. I think there are a few cases in the Pacific and in South America where they have moved forward with blue carbon. There have been some challenges, so we're trying to coordinate with our colleagues in Fiji that have led those efforts to figure out what were the challenges they faced and what can we do to overcome those.
Oh, misal tokol waseng ayun magal tokol bula bula ada lang ako na diriga wala ada dula say magarabo dong mo kurtial waseng turun tial aygal mangrove ecosystem malu tial loriom el mo mangegrera tial mkit yol tram lidul mo ko mo spegal mo mangegram kit yol tram lidul ngara mo ngil teletel wal ko na diriga msado say en garuba ka diriga lo ay say ela tabay ko ramla vital gut makla ko ra ke grelom sub ngatel ngar belaw luase temla ke isang tial kebur sra bela rogin en wado dula sen gorak medel waklungela did you say dori baseball field
there are 3,000 baseball fields.
3,000 temla ke isang tial klungela kebur sra ngar belaw mom tigla sei tial klungela kebur sra ngar belaw ase de la sen medel logo del le del telael tial gorandra yakwa klungel gora los perseguidos se baseball field así bol se era adol gora daital ngaria wil cloud ngi se mul awak klungel ngana nya mol gol así el aquí gora blaga se seguir imol baseball field el klungel mangrove asbe edel مسبيل بالغورا أقوقريني إرول دارت كلوك. Did you say 200 a year?
Yeah, I said 100 to about 200 a year.
مسبيل غورا بالغورا دارت كلوك المو إرول دارت كلوك رتارا كسل سيد الإيمول وقلو الجبور سلوقلو لا تيال غوران رايا كيوا سبيل لو سيسبيلو دو.
Per baseball field.
Yeah,
too.
per baseball.
Not all of it. Yeah, so all of Palau could potentially generate maybe $1 to $2 million a year.
And when you say generate from that,
yeah,
how do you generate money by?
So,
I mean,
that's part of what we're trying to figure out. But there are carbon markets, there are carbon credits, and so countries can put carbon up for sale, and then investors can buy it.
When you say countries can put up carbon up for sale, meaning if you can serve that one baseball field, we can put it up for sale.
Potentially, yes. They're focusing mostly on restoration right now, but they are moving forward with conservation. And it's not for sale. It's like almost like a credit. It's like a stock,
right? It's
like the stock market. So you're buying like this credit. So and there are other mechanisms to do that. There are other ways where I know there's a carbon calculator has been developed for Palau, where travelers can offset their carbon footprint by investing in this carbon calculator. So I think there are a lot of options on the table, and we're just trying to discuss, if Palau is interested, and what are the mechanisms involved that we need to participate in this.
Tial togora sega togora ultra rasel waqtu la imal baseball field de OCCB dart الموضوع الإيرول دات الكلوغرا عراق تيادير قل ديسكاس دي من هذا قالوا لنا وملقوا له شيء كذا بتقول تلتيل له شيء مغراض عندك هذا صار له شيء كذا قدروا تلقى سوليوشن هذا تريد يجي له شيء وهذا قرا مساعدين شيء قرا وقت التلتيل لا يجي قابوسي قدروا نقول كيجري التجيد السبيل قرا وال القصد لي معلومة كيجري نير تيال ممكن تلو ترابلولات إني سبيل البعض قرا مايكل كريديت الجيل الشيء مال سقوم كذا يجي له لذل تلا البليلا يأكيو مقلون الأريال بليلا يأكيو أمقو كذا قريوم معلومة كان شو إن شاء الله سيسبي أكمل بيشرا قرا أقل كليشن قربا كسي إن شاء الله قرا تال موديل إيرول مليون رأى سيدو توني السقوم كذا سباق لجيد أكمل لو قدام مقلون البليلا القران رياكيو الجبورس
I want to make one more comment if I can.
Yes.
So when I say conservation too, I think what we need to figure out is how to balance human need with the goods and services the mangroves provide. So when I talk about conservation, I don't think about like completely banning harvest of anything.
Right.
I'm talking about balancing, you know, being able to go in and collect clams and crabs and maybe maintain the channels to maintain the flow. So cutting back the mangroves, maybe selectively harvesting a few trees for house poles.
And I believe that's the concept that we are kind of using these days when it comes to conservation.
Yeah.
We don't want to, and I agree with you, we don't want to conserve so people will suffer.
Yeah.
We wanted to find that balance where people are continuing to, you know, enjoy the natural resources while maintaining it.
Yep.
In other words, I guess the bottom line I'm trying to say is, you know, the sustainability of these resources and places.
And you can even like with sustainable harvest, if you just remove a few trees or or you clear the channel, you stimulate growth
we stimulate
of the trees.
Malgol waseng gora mal dililut lam katak sa luda sel waseng hindi akal soal gora seng kada rula conservation or gora wadong simula ngara marang. Ngomaral wasay ngiredal matig sel gora awalungil balance kada mga riom o sisilta mga uspe man sa edal wada gora amalmol magtek uspe ngagi del bay dirgal malgol wasay gagi del gora kaburs asum kada sa sustainable use sa edal gora uspe rin mangge riom uspe rin ang malgol wasay sa edal gukto dob atelal gora magiklol garal uspe la community embay promote embay oktubre abesel crowd abesel kaburs gukto mang malungil. I think we have a culture. Let's see what this guy is curious about.
Caller on the air.
Okay. Ale, maluwil ko talaga asap mas station may altoktang. Mal masauro toktang ang kwa mas mo dia tetelela ausa tetelela kabus tuiringi ya blulas ma armele belau. Maluwil ablal tung gamam arbelau amna mo lakla kuida namle lakla kuida rakmam. Maging mal mudu kerbelau terus perablu matau yang girel ngaria awa selbornya ulang memteng rakaburs meskipun memteng rakaburs adia kloral merablu ablu amral mokro magi merablu memteng rakaburs lekaburs seloral aba rakaburs akaburs selakaburs amral moratwa madurat mol lemaral moklo burs magi meral motok makburs amral moklo magi mal madengei maula uspa lam rakabur sawaisei yang maran mo akbur sa ablu amran mokto makbur samran mo motuwa yang jil waisei ablu adre kan itsul waisei magin kel waisei mela sel mo mesra abelau ai kal uspa lam belau ngarat lamal ringi ngarat melala atel malam ai kal somiar adrang apara emalungile albram dung ndi el ang ai kal uzo dal amo saur mo sebela mo wir bela mo ria uzo melang ay agel morul nguk ma mga simer kamam mo mring kamam magi morul ang ara serap lumam ma akabur ser kamam lagi mak memoria uzo zer mem amerika la ma usper kamam nguk ma mga simer kamam almu teltang ay kakita asim open mas kamam mura kamam mga simer kamam magi morul ang ara wat telel eqp nguk ma mga simer kamam ruai agel gira amerika lang maramay kal taligraph may lagi mo target radu makoma makuha kama soma mabluma maluru rablul agal mawil mengurusi kama target radu magibli la kodal ay ka diulas makmal maskatoktang makamoto daw suam girel ay ka tol black to mabela bluma polo ay thank you bye.
Long question.
Actually, it sums up to two questions. His first comment was, it's not really, question slash comment. He was just saying, we've been using these mangroves, and he believes that, Palawan people knows how to deal with the mangroves, which I agree. But the reason why we are here to kind of discuss this is the young generations doesn't necessarily know how things were back in the 60s and 70s. Of course, the old generation knows the importance of mangroves, but we just here to bring these things out so that at least we can bring some awareness to the young generation.
Definitely.
And his second point was, for some reason, he thinks that I mean, the way I hear his comment, the tone is like, okay, we've been here for such a long time, and now you're here try to, kind of tell us, what's, which is, I kind of disagree with him, but anyway, second point is, he's asking, well, he's one of the people that thinks, American outside people will come and tell us what to do, and then we ended up following them. The way he put the whole question, but and his second question is, can you ask Dr. Mackenzie, now, for example, now they're bringing this antenna to Palau, and they're trying to establish a military. How can that kind of help? It was
Yeah, that second question, I don't know if I can answer that.
Right. I agree.
That's beyond my capacity. But I do hear I'd like to. He made some really good points, and it's up to Palau. And I hear what he's saying, that foreigners come in here, but the information I'm sharing, the stories I'm sharing, are from other islanders, and not just in the Pacific, but in the around the world. And so it's the trying to see how their land management has impacted their mangroves, and trying to learn from that, I think, is the message I'm trying to share.
Right.
And I have to say, getting the youth excited about mangroves, I am fully behind that. I have one of my students is from Pohnpei. And she says, she calls it beyond the stink. She told me once that mangroves to her were just smelly, mosquito-infested habitat, and now she appreciates them for all these other goods and services.
Right.
Beyond the stink of the mangrove.
Beyond the stink of the mangrove. Yeah, I guess that's I agree. El gora omso de legal dolgoi tia gora dire gora ngel morengel ade ngasen ngel mlegol ngasen malu moragel tingel ngel ade mlegol gire legal tora mangroves kida amadingete uspel batetela mangrove diga bebira gora wal qoma gailom sub el sod el wadi dangel ke kargin me olt enya of course sel at the end of the day gid el other below kida decide la se magad magarang diagal dula seng ngor ola begal el result omsub el me gora se ya ngirul magara gora wallo el dub el me no gadi ma result omsub el me o wais mora boy la se gida gim gora miles se gim sub tel gburse of course sel bol gid el other below gid ya mo decide se mungil dogram se up to us se lo question agora modal sal se de lo ngeringi se lo hacen ahora magal tarigera bam la mei ma soldado maranga kada se ngora wal abolto bra ikel tial el togo era tial lula gimle tial rasol me wa isagal togo me bere ne abo de enser ngaria adal guk se il monger se okay, all right, Rich, it's 8 o'clock. We'll pretty much come to the conclusion of we have pretty much come to the conclusion of. I just want to bring one more question. So, what's the long-term goal for this the work you're doing in Palau? I mean, meaning the research.
Well, it's working with my colleagues at the Division of Forestry, Land and Water, and with MAFE. Being a MAFE employee. The long term is to just track how mangroves are changing over time. And we can use that information and for various reasons. But that's the goal, is just to monitor how they are doing over time. And I guess specifically one of the things we're looking at is how are they responding to sea level rise?
Oh, because that's a new trend.
That is the biggest, aside from development and deforestation, sea level rise is probably the biggest threat they face.
I see.
And so we are actually setting up monitoring stations in Palau, actually across the Pacific,
I see.
To track this. So that's the long-term goal.
O belat tagi dulu rel ngaruba ka ta Dr. McKenzie. Nsoril mulmul mulkora wal monitor tal geburs. Kora mulmul mulmes tal geburs. Lelang tagi dulu pes tola sen dimral morbaba dal ela bululat. متقول ماشي يا شيء مثل ورا المربى بتل دل أبلورات إنغانيا القرى تجد دل أبلورات دي مرال متمول إنغانيا با بالقرى توم ليرا كوكتورا ها أقول له لا كبرس ماشي أقول بارت سيلفال ده سين لونج تيرم مونيتورينج Oh, I think we have maybe that'll be the last call because no more time.
Caller on the air.
Yes, good morning to all of employer Wave Radio and employee. Asap, good morning to you and good morning to the Dr. McKenzie. Thanks, we'll have you this morning. Asap, tiagi dager mong kamkarira Dr. Wasing. Sildones sa siapa? Mabela ang buto kayo sil budog. Siapa lam na increase sa sil. Mobot ko. Makikita nila ang awas siya. Umumpas, igalin sila other way around. Di nila increase sa future. Siya kaya lekor tokta. Malung nila program, ay rogoy blal, o siya klidil, ginila, atura kaburs, malway taken. Mal masaw nila alaap, and instruct nila other way around, kung mumpa nila value tiya kaburs. Ramo kaya siya gidil kaya mulakor nila ang kung sulang makuknek sa toksyo.
Oh, sila. Well, I don't know how to. Well, he's just curious. He's saying Japan's islands has somehow increased. Can that happen to Palau in the future?
Through mangrove expansion, you mean, or?
He just said the Yuns islands.
I think from an aspect of, bless you, from mangrove expansion, there's definitely a possibility. I'm not sure why the Japanese islands are increasing, if it's from volcanic activity, like we're seeing in Hawaii, or some type of there could be a tectonic uplift raising out. But I'd like to, I don't know if this answers your question, sir, but we have seen an expansion of mangroves in Palau, and this comes up a lot, that the mangroves are invading the seagrass areas, and what's happening is mangroves like to be at high tide, the high tide level, so you typically find them above mean tide to high tide. They're more happy at the higher tide level. So they need elevation. They need to be at a certain height in the water. And what's happening is we're getting erosion and sediment inputs from land use that's raising the elevation. It's getting trapped in the seagrass, raising the elevation to the height that allows the mangroves to spread out there. And so the mangroves are just kind of doing what they naturally do. So I hear conversations about trying to remove the mangroves. I definitely think maybe trying to control them, but I think the best method would be to try to figure out how to stop the sediment from, and then not only are you protecting the mangrove, you're protecting the seagrass and the reef. So I think that keeps coming up a lot.
Ajal ko rayun silmo betok ako ada kal salmengin dimbay ako ada kal sas longer dimbay ay slasay tial to ra kabur sa kadrogul belal adre ko ra madetngay ngal kabur sa ul mo extend moral mo ra kargel moral mo to mol ngil tial dit el memteng akabur sa mal moral niya ako ra sebed lasay omgon dia katal sediment memteng ra avaw ya kabur sa wal ko adik klebe la klungel ndit tiagi dolo katam tial dit am memteng el hombre que pudo adao mongal oral mom etchel sel gabo amral mogora wal met el guk basab ila akbur sil mod orni la gabur sangaria atalqail del el adao bel girel keri ndial guk sal maltmol el remos ma dial guk sal mal medel ma malol gorin ka kasi مسيجد الولترغوك del el adao bel keri akbur sel bel betela dingit lo mga grim lo al mom de nya guk mas ila kabur lo ma tel bak sel budula akargen mangmalgola sengire del indirekal gire del mangmalgola sengire gire del mesling al suma kabur sa gukmal mo klo munguk mo otomolia dulu la ar indirekal maknit lenguk ma gegrebli la ar mangire del maral ko mesa gigi detral lo así mangmasado sa ditaro leleng indirekal sa lekpan kabus alaba bodolas mangegrer ngel dingit el memterada meaning ay gal tora gora wa omat ut mala gire del kwa gargi indirekal sa mokla dingit el memtengel betul drada yep. I agree with you. We have to. It's kind of hard to just chop off the mangrove because we don't want to expand. But let's try to go to the root cause.
The root of it. Yeah, exactly.
Which is sediment. So
yeah,
maybe we should be more cautious about sediment going to the water and stuff like that. Anyway, Rich, we're 5 minutes over the time limit. So I guess do you have a final word that you want to say before I close?
No, I just thanks for having me. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to be out in Palau. You know, I've gotten to work here for the last 20 years, and I've got to live here. I've been here for a year, and I love Palau. I love the people I work with, and it's just a real honor and a blessing to be here. So thanks for having me.
Right, and I must apologize. I forgot to mention your Palawan given name. Yeah, 5 years ago when you came to do some work with
the forestry.
Yeah, the forestry. I believe the chief of forestry gave you a Palawan name, which is BNGAOL.
Yeah.
Dr. Richard BNGAOL Mackenzie. Ang clear wala BNGAOL. BNGAOL kubursa. Anyway, it's a pleasure to have you here, Richard. Just to talk about some facts about the mangroves. Why are they important to the ecosystem? And so it was nice to have you as a guest this morning. Malway siya kadokora marmara ulbong program bergi de terrible ngak time. Madibok ng taltial gurang asulia rogul adal mlos iltunin orange social radio shorgid maguk sel melbal sa el. Ada ko man sila rogul oreng sa makasel melbal sa el.
Talingim oh you Narawrawal kalbalula Limbalti Karin Elmalat karang aramaka Arangalage Balwa Magabe